attest to that. And it involves a tremendous amount that we accomplish. But at the same time, we are left with a deep wistfulness or a sense of sadness that we're not living our true potential. We are involved in a tremendous amount of doing and activity, but it's almost as if the deeper symphony of our creative potential, of our being, isn't being, fully expressed. So there are two dilemmas there. One of them is the fact that we see the perception of our capabilities, our experience of what we are capable of on the one hand, and how much of little of that we use. Otto Scharmer at MIT, who has written the book Theory U, talks about the collective dilemma. It's almost parallel dilemma at the collective level, which is that we are collectively, as people, as collectively, we are producing results that almost nobody wants. So individually, when we talk to each other about our aspirations, we seem to be completely on board with, very positive aspirations for what we would like to create collectively, but collectively, we don't seem to be able to do that. So in this brief webinar, what I'm hoping to do is to provide a handful of perspectives. It's really going to be a smorgasbord. So I want to again remind us that in my webinar, I don't try to seek to provide a system or a consistent solution. What I seek to do is to sprinkle, the field with many different insights and nuggets that I have garnered, and in the hope that some of you will be inspired by one or two of these, to discover a deeper layer of your own potential. So in that spirit, and I want to say in the spirit of full disclosure, that almost all my insights come from my reading of a Indian mystic called Osho, who left behind a legacy of over 2,000 books on various dimensions of human potential, and my own dance with life and experiences. So it's a sharing of perspectives. So one of the things we must remember when we talk about potential is that there are multiple layers within each one of us. Often we tend to regard the outermost layer, the presentation of ourselves in everyday life as who we are. But for us to remember that there are actually multiple layers within us. Think about something else. Think about energy. How many of us have had a day when we have been thoroughly exhausted? We get home from work and we crash on the couch. We are completely depleted of all energy, and we say we have no energy. Now, Osho reminds us, is it true that we have no energy at all? Or is it that we have the energy, but perhaps it's hidden at a deeper level? Suppose somebody told me that there's a tornado that is striking my house, or my house is on fire. All of a sudden, I would discover a new level of energy that was hidden within me. It may not have been available to me just at that moment. Or why talk about just grim scenarios? I receive a phone call that my long lost friend of 15 years that I deeply enjoyed is in town, and he's asking me to join him for a beer. I would be so ecstatic that all the tiredness that I had experienced would be instantaneously wiped away. And I would discover a new level of vibrancy and energy that was always within me. And so it is with human potential. No matter how we might feel depleted in terms of our energy level at the surface level, in terms of our potential, there's a deeper layer. So I want to now take you through a journey where I will expose you to a few perspectives that I've gathered that enable us, as if it were, to peel the layers of the onion, the onion of human greatness, and to be able to see how do we uncover and enact a deeper level of our own potential. So I want to begin with distinguishing between two types of greatness, at least. One of them is the kind of greatness that we attain to through conscious intention and effort. That is a matter of doing. You apply your mind to something, you concretely set goals and strive for it. There's another kind of greatness that the Eastern mystics have been fascinated about, which doesn't come out of conscious striving, but it almost is like a happening. It is something that happens to us. Like, for example, you become a more loving person. You have some inner breakthroughs in dealing with your issues, and all of a sudden, you seem to be exuding a different kind of fragrance. Your inner being has shifted to a different place. It's not something that you were struggling to achieve, but it is something that happened. So I want to also address these instances where greatness is happening. You pursue your heart and you pursue whatever it is that you're passionate about. And all of us, rather than you going after greatness, greatness seems to be coming to you. So I also want to talk about that and to recognize that normally when we talk about greatness, we are talking about grand outcomes of achieving big things. But the kind of greatness that I'm interested in addressing in today's webinar is not something where there's necessarily a grand outcome that leads to you making the headline, in a newspaper. It's those silent moments of inner flowering where you feel that you're gravitating systematically towards a deeper realization of your potential. So a few of the perspectives, I want us to recognize that on the negative side, I want to talk about briefly an article that I often refer to in my classes. It's called Stop Holding Yourself Back. It was published, the first author was Morrison, published in the Harvard Business Review, where she made a study of the types of barriers that seem to hold people back from realizing the fullness of leadership potential. So what kinds of things hold people back? I just want to quickly name those. One of them, she says, is our tendency sometimes to be too focused on our own personal goals, and to forget relationships. So if we are too narrowly focused on emphasizing our own personal goals, that's one of the ways in which we block ourselves from coming to a discovery of the deeper layers of our potential. Sometimes we are too focused on preserving a public image. I'm doing these seminars. I want them to go well. I want people to be wowed by my seminars. If my interest is so much on maintaining a public image, I'm less likely to be flowering to an expression of my intrinsic qualities. Our tendency sometimes to turn colleagues and competitors into enemies. How sensitive we are sometimes, where if somebody doesn't seem to be applauding, we just assume that they're very critical of us. And how many of us have fallen into the trap where the voice inside our head, our chattering monkey, has converted a colleague into an antagonist, where we believe that they are our enemies. Our tendency to be very individualistic, we want to go it alone. There seems to be a shame associated sometimes with asking for help, and we sometimes feel that we have to handle all of it by ourselves. And that can prevent us from forming the deep relationships, the network of exchanges and, in the larger ecosystem. And one of the most important ones that they talk about is our propensity sometimes to wait for permission. It's almost like we might have wonderful ideas and creative ideas, but we are waiting for permission, as if somebody has to step forward and ask us to contribute, rather than taking the initiative. One of the perspectives that has helped me a lot in terms of studying greatness, and I have to mention that my doctoral dissertation was titled The Architecture of Human Greatness. So I was very fascinated with studying greatness as a phenomenon. Excuse me. Sorry. Is the metaphor of the hairball. And I don't know how many of you have read this very intriguing book called Orbiting the Giant Hairball by Gordon McKenzie. It's about creativity within organizations. I would encourage you to read that. But extrapolating from that book, it seems to me that on a daily basis, our life occurs like a giant hairball. A hairball of a large assortment of activities and chores that we have to do. The hairball also consists of social expectations. People want us to conform to certain rules and standards and all of that. So all of life appears like a hairball. And if you're not conscious, when we start exercising a conscious awareness, we can become aware that that hairball of life, the expectations, the everyday list that we have to make of the things that we have to get through, even just to survive, that hairball can have such an intense gravitational pull that it can start sucking your creativity and your energy into it. And so by the time the sun is setting, you already feel depleted and you have just done enough to get by. How many of us can relate to the hackneyed metaphor of running as fast as you can on a treadmill? You're running for an hour on a treadmill, but you're exactly where you were. So the busyness of everyday life is that giant hairball. And in that hairball are so many little worries that consume our life. Think of the number of things that we worry about on an everyday basis, the chattering monkey in our heads that's constantly bringing up anxieties and, both of a social nature as well as of a financial nature, also of a spiritual nature and all of that. And the challenge of discovering and awakening to our own greatness is to be able to orbit this giant hairball. What do we mean by orbit? This might be the hairball. Can you stay connected to the hairball so you're not like falling off the deep end, getting disconnected from all of the worldly expectations and responsibilities? So you're in a relationship to those, you're fulfilling those, but you're also maintaining a safe distance from the hairball itself so that you are able to preserve your creativity and your independence. And the gravitational pull of the hairball has not completely sucked us in. What example can I think of? One of the most inspiring examples from my life that some of you may be able to relate to comes from the time when I was 9 years old in India, in New Delhi, where my mother used to be driving, and there was an intersection that was so busy. It was one of the most congested traffic intersections in New Delhi. There were 5 or 6 roads that were intersecting, and it was located just outside the president's house, the equivalent of the White House in India. So you can imagine the traffic congestion and everything of tourists and all of that. And the policeman who would be guiding the traffic and directing the traffic, I would constantly see that there was a very high turnover rate. Every few weeks, there would be a new policeman because that used to be such a stressful intersection that nobody could hold that job for more than a few weeks. It's like being in an air traffic controller's job. And, remember, it's just outside the president's house. So there's the added stress of the president looking at you from his window, right? So, but there was one policeman who stepped into that position literally and metaphorically, who held that position for years and who became a national celebrity. What did he do? He had a love of classical Indian dance called Bharatnatyam. For any of you who know Bharatnatyam, it's a very complicated and intricate sequence of footwear and steps. And he decided to choreograph Bharatnatyam-esque dances to the way he was guiding traffic. So here he would stand on a traffic island and start guiding traffic with very exotic dance moves that simulated the very steps of Bharatnatyam dancing. And he got so much energy from that, and he would pride himself in the fact, and you cannot see my feet, but I can tell you that I'm performing extremely intricate steps, which you obviously are hidden from your view, but he would weave the footwork and the bodily movements and make a performance out of it. Now, remember, this was at a tourist spot, right? The president's house. Can you see that by this exotic choreographing of his dance moves, he had actually made his life much harder because even more people gravitated to that intersection. Earlier, it was just the folks who wanted to see the president's house. Now it was also people who wanted to see the dancing policeman. But he stayed in that job for years because one of the things that he had done was he was orbiting the hairball of his own job. He was dealing with his responsibilities. He had not disconnected himself, but he left his own unique signature on it. And this is what I mean by orbiting the giant hairball. We live in modern bureaucracies, where you have job descriptions that are not necessarily attuned to enhancing personal growth. Most of the bureaucracies that we live in, they say, here is what we need done and go ahead and do it. Nobody is looking at, if I ask Param to do this, is this going to support him in his journey towards self-realization and self-actualization? No, bureaucracies ordinarily have a very pedestrian and mundane attitude. The challenge is ours to take that mundaneness and elevate it to a level of creativity and divinity. How do we do that? It is by inhabiting these roles, but by injecting a sense of individuality to them. And I'm not boasting about myself. I'm just talking about how I have experimented with it in my own life. I am a professor in a business school, right? And I'm supposed to teach organizational behavior. But my passion are the great wisdom traditions of the world. And the way in which I've made my job infinitely more in understanding is by bringing in my passion for wisdom traditions and for Eastern wisdom and looking at how that can be helpful for us in being, effective managers at work. This way, every day of my life ends up becoming an expression of my deepest passion. Another quick example to you that comes to mind was of an elevator operator. During the years, people have elevator operators in a high-rise building in Calcutta, India. There was an elevator operator who performed a very mechanical job of pushing buttons and letting people off in the floors that they are intending to go to. And he used to be always joyous, always singing, laughing, telling stories. And the journalist, who represented Business India, which is one of India's leading business magazines, stopped and asked him one day, I've seen you for years and you're performing the same monotonous job. My spirit would have died. How come you are always full of life and vitality? And the elevator operator explained. He said, look, there are many important people in this building that have their offices. I see the CEO of 5 companies have their offices in this building. And anytime anybody wants an audience with the CEO, they line up outside their office for an appointment and they wait. I'm the only person in the building where 5 CEOs are lining up outside my office to see me. Why would I not feel good about this? I have the most important job in the building. I have 5 CEOs waiting outside my door, anxiously awaiting my arrival. And he would tell stories, he would sing songs, he would tell jokes. So for the few minutes that you were in the elevator, you were not just focusing on the, how people are stressed. They don't even want to make eye contact on the elevator. And they're always looking at the indicator, watching the indicator move. No, that was not the life under the canopy of his invigorating personality. You would be entitled to jokes, stories. Sometimes he would sing. So those 1 or 2 minutes that you were in the elevator, you would emerge a happier person than you were, smiling and laughing. And often we come across people like this who are bringing a special lamp and a light to their roles. Their role might seem extremely bureaucratic to us, but they are putting a unique signature on it. So for each of us to ask ourselves, what is the unique signature that I can put based on what I'm passionate about, to build that bridge between our core commitments in life, our passions, and the seemingly mundane responsibilities that we might have been given. Now, this brings me to another topic, and Osho talks about a simple metaphor. And the metaphor is between being a lion in the jungle and a lion in the circus. It's very closely related to the theme that I just explored. So Osho says, think of a lion in the jungle. A lion in the jungle is alive and presiding. He's the emperor of the jungle. He oversees his whole jungle. He's the emperor of the jungle. He's presiding over the jungle. But this lion can roar in the middle of the night and it resounds through the jungle. But sometimes that lion may be captured by a circus owner and trained to perform circus tricks. You can all see that now the circus lion makes so many people happy, right? The kids are happy, he brings in the revenues, he's performing his assigned job description. But a part of the lion in the jungle has had to die in order to become the lion in the circus. So the question becomes, how do we, even though many of us have become lions in the circus, you're born as a child full of creativity, and then you're taught how to perform division in school, you have a job description at work, you know the knowledge and competencies that you need to display. But then how do you discover the vaster ocean of talents and gifts that you have that go beyond the assigned job descriptions? And I want to draw from an unlikely source, Hegel, the philosopher, who talked about one of the images of greatness he talks about is not playing out the assigned script and role, rising above playing out our assigned life script and the ordinary humanity contained within oneself. And he talks about how one state of consciousness where you're the citizen, you're somebody who just follows the laws, and lives, in a very official procedure-based mentality. Rules and regulations are what you follow, and they are your God. You bow to the rules and regulations and the power of bureaucracy, the policies. Then you evolve to being a person where you acquire a little bit of a human touch. You are a bureaucrat, but you're a bureaucrat with a heart. If somebody has to be laid off, you will feel their sadness of what they might be going through, right? So you're not just merely an extended arm of a corporation, but you are a person who is a human being. And you are somebody who has a relationship with people. You've gone beyond the I-it relationships of bureaucracies. Remember, an I-it relationship is where I'm a person and you're an object, to an I-thou relationship where I'm a person and you're a person. So we are having a being-to-being relationship. I become a person. So you go from being, from being a citizen to being a person. And then he says the third stage is being a hero. When do you become a hero? When your life is not just about conforming to the box of expectations that exist, right? But your calling is to create something, is to create history, to make an added contribution so that we leave the world a better place than when we stepped into it, to enrich the world. So you go from citizen to person to hero in an evolving state of consciousness. I would also be failing in my duty if I do not reference the work of Abraham Maslow. And I want to share, many of you are familiar with the work of Abraham Maslow, who talked about a hierarchy of human motives. But I want to mix it with Eastern wisdom and give you a different version of it. So for example, in the Sufi tradition, says Osho, there is the notion of valleys. Valleys are places that we walk through, but sometimes they look so beautiful to us and sometimes they're so deeply satisfying that we run the risk that we will be stuck in that valley. So for example, we can see each of Maslow's levels as a valley, and our job is not to get stuck in that valley. The first valley we go into is the valley of physiological desires: food, thirst, sex, and all of these. And some of us can get so hung up in this valley that our motivation becomes predominantly physiological. Now, the challenge is for us to get ourselves unstuck and move to the next valley. Now, the next valley is the valley of safety and security. And many of us get so stuck in the valley of safety and security that we are always waiting for the worst to happen, and our efforts become, will I have a job tomorrow? And how can I keep my job? How can I please my bosses? And we are bedeviled by a constant sense of insecurity, and our entire life becomes arranging our lives for more security. Now, Osho would say, move on to the next valley. Don't get stuck in this valley. And then you move into the valley of affiliation. You want to belong. You want to be part of a family. You want to be part of a social group, and you get much comfort from social acceptance. Now, you can get stuck in the valley of social acceptance, where all that we are looking for is to be accepted by people, and we become conformists. We don't rise to the fullness of our individuality. We just become a conformist, conforming to people's expectations, to social expectations, and we never truly get to sing the deeper symphony that is embedded within us. Now, social expectations and social recognition can be very fulfilling, but it is for us to disentangle ourselves and move on to the next valley. And there you are at the next valley, which is the valley of esteem needs. Here is where you want to be respected. You want people to look up to you, and it fills your ego. And it's one of the valleys where the majority of modern professionals get stuck in. We get so intoxicated with a sense of our own competence. And many of the professions are so set up that our importance depends upon the world being terrible. Like, for example, if I'm a doctor, my importance as a doctor depends upon people being sick. Isn't that ironic? I'm supposed to be somebody who promotes health, but the profession itself is a response to a problem. And very insidiously, the perpetuation of that problem leads to my importance. For example, if everybody was emotionally and mentally healthy, I'd have no importance as a therapist. the profession of psychotherapist would disappear. So the psychotherapy profession has a very weird and intriguing investment, not consciously stated. I'm sure no therapist will tell you that they want people who are suffering emotionally. I'm not saying it's consciously stated. I'm just stating and looking into the deeper logic of institutionalization and professionalization, which is independent of any individual's aspirations. I'm sure every doctor wants to see healthy people and every therapist wants people to be healthy, but the professional game is set up in a very different way sometimes. So we get often stuck in being respected. So then we have to disentangle ourselves from the valley, and there, says Maslow, is the peak of self-actualization, where you're done with your physiological needs, you're done with your safety needs, you're done with your social needs of acceptance, you're done with your esteem needs of being respected, and you now awaken to the potential that you are fully capable of becoming. Who am I fully capable of becoming? And when we begin to start addressing that question, you move away from a deficiency-based approach to life. A deficiency-based approach to life is trying to prove that I'm good enough, is trying to prove that I belong, is trying to prove that I have that there's nothing wrong with me. An abundance-based approach to life is where you say, you know what? I am whole and complete. I am beautiful. I am unique, special, and extraordinary. There's no other human being like me anywhere on this planet. Wow. So I am already unique, special, and extraordinary. So what is the creativity, the genius, the talent that can flow from inside me? What can I contribute? I want to share this with you with a personal touch of my own autobiographical tragedy, if you will, where I ended up spending nearly 25 years dedicating myself to acquiring equivalent to 4 master's degrees and a PhD, because somebody said I was mentally disabled as a child. I was seen as a very, as a child who was lacking in smartness and intelligence. So look what I did. It was a deficiency-based motivation of trying to acquire 4 master's degrees and a PhD to prove to myself and to prove to the world that I was good enough. The kind of flowering into our greatness that we talk about is an abundance-based striving, where we say, who I am is whole and complete. And if I'm unique, special, and extraordinary, and there's no other human being like me, what can I become? I want to address one more challenge that came to me just a few days ago, and that was the very interesting discovery that I spend a lot of my time creating problems of my own making and then solving those problems. Many of our problems we create, and then we spend days and days trying to solve those problems. As Osho says, we create molehills out of nothing. And then once those are molehills, we are not satisfied with them, we make them into mountains. Because when we have a mountain to climb, our ego feels nourished. Oh my God. So one of the biggest challenges is that we are often tempted to live in misery. We love our problems because we are afraid of our greatness. My financial problems, my marital problems, my social problems keep me occupied. And if I did not have any of these problems, I would be confronting the infinite peaks of my own potential. And the existentialist philosophers have called it the dizziness of freedom, that if I'm fully aware of how free I am as a human being to create possibilities, that would be so paralyzing to me that I find it easier instead to manufacture problems and keep myself busy. How do we reverse this? I want to share with you a very beautiful book that really changed my life. And my son always says, Dad, the day you read this book, my life changed. It is called Joy by Osho. It is called Joy, and it has got many beautiful strategies. And I want to share with you a very simple one that I started applying. Osho reminds us that too often we spend our time in worry and anxiety and too little time rejoicing. For example, I will go for an hour feeling thirsty, and then I find a water cooler and I start drinking water. When I start drinking water, I have an immediate wave of happiness over me, but it's fleeting. I don't treasure it. I don't prolong it. I have probably been suffering thirst for half an hour, but my dance with the water is just 30 seconds or 1 minute and I'm out of it. I would encourage each of us to find moments during the day that we can celebrate, where we can dance, where we enjoy. You're driving somewhere and your favorite song is on the radio. Despacito. Start singing along and enjoying the music and all of that, and to celebrate those moments of happiness, because a joyous being is going to flower into a true expression of their greatness, because you're not going to be distracted by the minor distractions and worries that plague us. So folks, with that book recommendation of Joy by Osho, the author is Osho, O-S-H-O, I will be signing off. And as in keeping with the tradition that we have established, I will just continue to stay on the air for anyone who would want to make a comment or share a sentiment or have a question. But we have officially ended our 30-minute webinar today, and we will be concluding. And if you want to stay on for a few minutes, you're welcome to linger, but there is absolutely no pressure. Okay, so we will be concluding our webinar.